Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Today I want to try to address a topic. It's a very complex topic, very much related to exercise science and sports science. And I want to try to bring it down to the level that the layman can grasp without turning this into rocket science. Because someone said that in the comments to my last video, you guys are trying to turn lifting into rocket science. And because someone else didn't like the fact that I mentioned something that CJ Allen and I had discussed without giving him credit, as though I don't pull from a dozen different experts and I don't talk to experts every single day to try to stay current on my data because of the wide variety of topics I cover. But I'm going to give CJ Allen credit for this. And for those of you who don't know him, he is currently working on his doctoral work in human biomechanics. He is an elite level power lifter who also coaches bodybuilders for bodybuilding contest prep and powerlifters for meet prep, and used to coach rugby players. But he basically said that bodybuilders try to look at the body like a stack of Legos, as though you could isolate muscles or isolate heads of muscles, particularly when it comes to hypertrophy. And here's the problem with that line of thought. This is the direction that bodybuilding has gone, and because it's an improper understanding of the way the body functions, bodybuilders just have to throw more drugs at it because they still don't understand basic training concepts for the most part. The bodybuilding solution is to up the dose, up the dose, up the dose. Throw more drugs at it year after year because your training sucks. You don't understand how the body works, so you have to make up for it with more drugs, and this is why you see truly drug-free bodybuilders are oftentimes carrying less total muscle mass than the truly drug-free guys and a lot of other strength sports. And it's again because they're trying to adopt training concepts that didn't work for the drugged up guys, so they had to throw more drugs at it, and they don't have the drugs to bridge the gap. So they end up growing muscle slower as a result. And it is this whole concept that human body parts are separate body parts, so that they perform or grow and adapt to training stimulus in terms of hypertrophy is completely different units, and that's not true. And people really want to get into this deep anatomy, and when I mention something like your long head is lagging, I don't mean that you should go do a lot of long head work. I mean that it might be lagging slightly because you're not doing enough total pressing volume to stimulate all three heads, and just the primary heads that get worked the most and the most stimulation are getting maximum growth, and your long head might only be getting 80% or 90% of the potential growth, so you might need to come in and do one set to stimulate that last bit to get it to grow. And that's something people forget. There's a finite limit to how much growth you can stimulate in a given muscle, even though the workload keeps going up. And it is based on your personal genetics. It is based upon what drugs you're on. And for the genetically average or even slightly above average natural lifter, it's not going to be a very high amount of muscle growth that you can stimulate at one time that will actually grow. You can keep stimulating more, but it's not going to grow any further. And so when you get into these debates of a given head of a muscle might only be getting 20% or 30% stimulation from a given lift, we're only talking off of one set. You can stimulate for the primary movers and primary heads up to 80 or 90% of the possible growth that you could get out of it from a single set. But when we start adding in multiple sets, you're getting less and less growth in those primary movers, but you're still stimulating new growth in those secondary movers. And we know that for hypertrophy purposes, we've seen very, very good hypertrophy in the lab and in studies in humans going as low as 20% load. So if a muscle is only getting 20 or 30% stimulation, and you throw enough sets at it, it's going to grow tremendously, even though it was not a primary mover in a movement. And so for hypertrophy, this doesn't matter that much, and that's why you have seen guys who use an ultra high, wide variety of exercise selection produce physiques that are no better, and sometimes even getting beat by someone who only does a few exercises, even in bodybuilding. Even when they have similar genetics, when they're using the same drugs. That's why you saw guys like Dorian Yates come in. Dorian Yates had a relatively low exercise selection. He didn't do 4 different lifts per body part. He focused on a few big, heavy, basic compounds and a few isolation movements, and his exercise selection was very low. People will scream drugs. Well, so is everyone else he was beating. Everyone else he was beating was on grams of gear and growth hormone and insulin. So we've seen this historically through the past. It almost doesn't matter, and people forget that. They want to throw a wide exercise selection at something when they don't realize just more volume with the same lifts will still start filling in those weak points to a large degree, and you only need to step in when something is really dramatically being understimulated. You can come in with a couple of sets, 1 or 2 sets of a very specific movement to isolate that head to bring it up, and it will catch up. Now what you're going to find with a natural lifter is that they might have to, when they get to a certain threshold, stop progressing on a lot of the other lifts to get things caught up, because otherwise, because of their slow growth, they may not ever get balanced if they continue to stimulate new growth in the muscles that are way ahead. But you need to be fairly advanced to really worry about that kind of thing, and you're still going to always have genetic and structural limits. And people forget this. They don't seem to understand that you cannot stimulate the glutes without stimulating the hamstrings or the lats. And it's all cumulative towards your growth. So you can't do a squat or a deadlift without your hamstrings and your lats growing. And the funny thing is, exercise selection does more for athletic performance and strength as far as the function of muscles do through specificity of training than it does through hypertrophy. I can take 6 different lifts, and several of them don't fully activate all functions of a muscle and still stimulate maximum hypertrophy in that muscle through workload, but I may not get maximum muscular performance or power or the specific angles that I needed to perform through for a given sport. So it's really interesting that bodybuilders are the ones who use the highest exercise selection oftentimes, yet they have the least need for it to successfully compete compared to a lot of other athletes who actually might use a lower exercise selection than they do. So it's really a messed up situation in philosophy. But that's enough of that rambling, and that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go.